Off the Wall Productions is proud to present Voices of the Methow. This is a series of conversations with interesting folk in and around the valley. On December 19th, 2018, Randy Lewis, a Wenatchee tribal descendant, and historian and author Bill Layman spoke at a presentation promoting their new book, Red Star, Blue Star, Defeats Spexman, given at the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center. Bill spoke and gave a slide presentation showing the collaboration of the museum with local Native American tribes and their heritage. And Randy shared some background of the local tribes, particularly the Wenatchee, and the geology of the area relating to the new book, which is an ancient legend. I've already got Randy's portion of this talk loaded up on this YouTube channel, and you can check that out. It's under Red Star, Blue Star, Defeats Spexman. Now, this is going to be Bill speaking and giving his portion that he gave with a slideshow. Be sure and check out Randy's portion if you haven't already done that. Enjoy!
I have the honor now of bringing up Mr. Bill Layman.
So before we get into Randy's portion of the presentation, I wonder if we can dim the lights now. I wanted to kind of go off of this notion of a bead necklace, in that the various projects that our museum has done over the years, each one is like a very special bead, and that it forms a necklace that brings us actually tonight. Every event that's happened in the museum's history is leading up to tonight, and we have a very, very special opportunity here in a community to change the way people see our place, to see the landscapes. So I'm going to do a little bit of history of our museum and its relationship with Native American culture. The Columbia River Archaeological Society was formed in 1921. It was composed of orchardists and businessmen and bankers and whatnot, and they met on a weekly basis. And one of the pieces of work that they did was to strive to protect the petroglyphs at Rock Island Rapids, which were subject to some graffiti during the 20s. And they took a keen interest in Native American culture. Some of you may know the author Mourning Dove, who is the first Native American novelist, a Colville Confederated Tribes person. And so they really set the stage for what was to come. In 1930, they received news that Puget Sound Power and Light was going to build the first dam across the Columbia River, and the Columbia River Archaeology Society was instrumental in negotiating with Puget Sound Power and Light the photographing of the petroglyphs that were on this very special island. Randy will tell you perhaps a little bit about that later. And this is one of A.G. Simmer's photographs. A.G. Simmer was a photographer in Wenatchee who did a number of scenes in our community. They also removed a number of petroglyphs, about 32 or 33 of them, that were in the keeping of the Columbia River Archaeological Society. Well, in 1942, the Columbia River Archaeological Society morphed into the North Central Washington Museum. The Carnegie Building, which was built in 1911, moved to a new location in 1938, and so it became then the nucleus of the North Central Washington Museum. And there where it's circled, you see that very same petroglyph that A.G. Simmer photographed while it was still on the island. The interesting thing about this petroglyph is that we don't know where it is. So one of the jobs of the Native River Fund and I think the Wenatchee Advisory Committee is to locate some of the photographs that were carted off the island or otherwise lost. This was from a postcard that I bid on through eBay about a month ago. And, magnifying it, you could see that indeed this was that petroglyph, which is an amazing petroglyph, actually. So during the 50s and the 60s, the relationship with the Native American community languished, if it didn't kind of go away altogether. And we find that in 1961, a decision was made to move the petroglyphs, which had been at the basement of the Carnegie Building, to the steam locomotive at Locomotive Park. So the thing that this is when I came on the scene with my wife, Susan Evans, and we noticed that somehow this didn't seem right to have petroglyphs behind a chain link fence, behind what was really the symbol of the conquest of the West. So we were kind of aghast by it and approached the North Central Washington Museum. Bill Stewart was then the director. They had, meanwhile, moved in 1976 to this building that you're in now. And Bill Stewart said, well, we're just focusing on the pioneer era forward. The Kashmir Museum is really where you need to talk to people about these petroglyphs. And we thought, well, okay. We hung tight for a while, and then Dick Bell, who was the board president, donated his entire fossil collection to the museum, and they established an exhibit of fossils. So we thought, well, if your earlier date is the pioneer period, maybe, just maybe, there would be a place for interpreting our Native American culture. So Janice Janicic, who was working at the PUD, Colville Confederated Tribe member of Wenatchee, came and joined our committee, and then we established this exhibit that you see upstairs with the petroglyphs from Rock Island Rapids. Then I was fascinated by how do we get these petroglyphs back on the island, at least in our mind's eye. We knew we couldn't get them back on the island because it was flooded. But so it led me to engage in about 4 years of research, finding every single photograph I could find of Rock Island Rapids. And after finding a great image of Rock Island, the reprographics person at the Seattle Army Corps of Engineers says, well, if you're interested in that, take a look at this microfiche. And it showed that there were like 151 photographs taken in 1891 that showed the river from the international boundary clear down to Priest Rapids. No one had seen those since the Chicago World's Fair in 1894. So, that was pretty exciting to say, wow. And the intention was we wanted the children of our community to see the river as it was, to be able to know their place here. And so we developed this children exhibit. We had like 13 schools contributing to the exhibit. It was lots and lots of fun. The mayor built the steamboat for us that ran on a little railway track lining up Entiat Rapids. And we had Rich Beyer, who was a person that I grew to really love and admire. He kindly decided to take a commission to create Coyote leading the salmon up the river, which was the beginning of the exhibit. And you can see his cedar renditions of Coyote and the salmon up in the history gallery upstairs. And then we decided, well, let's move Coyote and see if we can get him to the newly established riverfront park, the Walla Walla Park. And so we approached Jim Pope at the PUD and said, we'd like really to do this. We partnered with the Rotary Club, who gave us the ability to cast this in aluminum. And we had the distinct pleasure of driving in an area that really had been a dump, because we had forgotten about the river entirely. And we located this site for the present sculpture, which is a beloved sculpture in our valley now. That was in 1990. So each one of these kinds of builds upon the other. And this is Coyote as he is yesterday. He dresses for the weather sometimes. In the 4th of July fireworks, we gave them great big earmuffs because they have the fireworks right there by the site. Then I approached Mary Marchand, who was Randy's mother, and I said, she said, well, why did you stop at the border with your book? And I said, well, you need to do the whole river. She was very adamant about it, actually. So that launched us into an effort of doing research on the historical photography of the entire Columbia River, all 1,243 miles of it. And then we opened with this exhibit where we invited people to take a photograph of the river and then write whatever they saw in that photograph. And it turned into the book River of Memory and the exhibit. And the exhibit was extraordinary in that we had fish suspended from the ceiling, and the exhibit traveled to the Royal British Columbia Museum, the Nelson Cornerstone Museum, the Temastolok Center in Oregon. It went to the Washington State Historical Society. It went to the Central Washington University. It got enormous play, and we were just delighted by the response of the community to it. And this is at the Royal British Columbia Museum, this particular photograph. Then, as part of that, we did an honoring of Native Elders Day, where 300 people came, and Susan had the job of trying to find hotels and motels to put them all up in. And it was a great day because we had a salmon feast. Well, there was a problem in that we had reserved the Centennial Park for, this salmon feast and whatnot. And then we saw an announcement in the paper that the Bicycle Club was having a race right there, where they were going to be serving beer and all kinds of things. And we called them 2 days beforehand. And we said, we have a problem. We have the permit, to have this. You guys don't have a permit. And they said, well, what can we do? So they got 2 great big circus tents. We put them in the back, and one of the highlights of their day was that they had the Russian Cossack motorcycle team going down the street on Wenatchee Avenue. So you saw all these, Indian people who were peeking through the curtains looking at these acrobats on motorcycles. It was such a fun thing. But it wasn't all fun. It was a time, actually, where we had some very serious moments. We invited these people from all over the Columbia River to come to the exhibit just for them. We opened it up, Rex Buck here opened it up, and there were 5 languages represented. And each in turn person came up in the exhibit space, and they said a prayer, and they talked from their hearts about what the river meant to them. And it was just an extraordinary event. That was back in 2006. And these projects from 2002 on were funded in part by the Native River Fund. And then Susan got up in the middle of the night one night after that, and she said, "Parade! We need to have a parade." And we learned that the Wenatchee people had never been invited to an apple blossom parade before, which was astounding to us. So we went to Entiat and purchased their old 57 Buick, which had a platform for the Entiat princesses. And then we converted it into a float that we had as an entry in the 2008 parade. And this was quite a day. This was an amazing day. How many people remember that parade? Quite a few people. So we honored Lewis Miller and Mary Marchand, who was essentially blessing the valley. Our question when we moved to the valley was, where are the Indian people? Where are they? And it seemed to us that there was a big problem for all of us from a mental health perspective, that we did not have relationships with Native American people. They had gone up north. Some of them had gone south. And we thought, this is something that was a wound for us, a wound for the community. Susan is a social worker. I'm a mental health counselor, or at least I was. So this gained a lot of momentum, and we worked our tails off through that winter to create this float. We invited great-grandson of Chief Harmelt, Matthew and William Dick. Matthew just passed away this past year. And it was quite the. When we went down the parade route, everybody stood up and clapped. They were so excited to see Native people in our community and being able to have a parade. And Randy was a coyote in this parade. It was another coyote leading the salmon up the river story. And all the rest of us were salmon, and there were 40 of us in these salmon hats made specially for the parade. How many people here were actually salmon? Stand up, stand up. Give them an applause for being salmon. You're going to soon find out it was not necessarily an easy job. And, there's the walking the 2.5-mile parade route, but more than that, we had assignments. So we were a drill team, actually. We had loops and arrows, and whenever coyote came and kind of scared us, we did a scatter maneuver, and then we just did a general milling. Here you see us in the loop with Randy going down the Orondo Avenue. So when I say it wasn't easy, we were contending with a story that was a celebrative story of the salmon returning up the Columbia River. But along the way, coyote, he would have to kill some salmon in order to feed the chiefs that were up in the villages and the bands, and then he would create rapids and things like that. So Randy, he had the job, and we as salmon had the unfortunate task of being clubbed by him that day, many times, my friend, 6 times and counting. And, we flailed on the sidewalk, and, we then got up and then continued on our way, and Randy, in his own inimitable way, helped us down through the parade route. I tell you, this was a beautiful day. We had these mylar screens so you could actually see the fish jumping on the river. Perhaps one of the most extraordinary days of my lifetime. Then a person approached me and said, I've got these slides that my uncle had in his closet in Tacoma. I don't know if you would want them or not. They were taken by my great uncle, who was the fire chief of Wenatchee. His name was T.A. Weaver. And he proceeded in 1962 to do an aerial survey with a friend of his that was a World War II pilot, and photographed the entire river, going, waving up around, and took, like hundreds and hundreds of photographs from the air. And he said, would you like these? And I said, sure, let's get them to the museum. So part of this Native River Fund is collections, and here we got this amazing collection that gave a portrait of the river, the only color oblique aerial views of the Canadian Columbia. And more than that, we decided to ask Arnie Clark, who was airport manager here and an ace Vietnam War pilot, to, for the price of gas and oil, do the entire river survey that Weaver did, where we found out where he took the photographs and then rephotographed them. So look at the difference between these views. I don't know if I can go back. This is above where Mica Dam is at the Great Bend of the Columbia River, and that's how it looks presently with the reservoir. And then our latest project was the River of Baskets exhibit. How many people attended and saw that? Quite a few people. That's wonderful. This was an extraordinary exhibit where we asked native basket makers from all up and down the river to see if they might be willing to exhibit their work. And we had a wonderful response from people. Our world-famous basket maker, Elaine, will you please stand up, was one of the basket makers represented. Where are you, Elaine? Yeah, she was there. And maybe we have a couple more basket makers. Carol's here. Carol, will you stand up, please? Come on. Oh, and Cynthia, you stand up. And Randy graced our presence too. So that was a lovely experience for us all. And then most recently, even though the Native River Fund wasn't part of this, we've continued this tradition. You see how each step allowed for a new development in how we, in our community, can honor Indigenous presence. So the Curtis exhibit that you see now is just another example of that. And that leads us to this project. We had asked Randy, as a part of the River of Baskets exhibit, to give a cultural landmarks tour. We'd gotten to know him from the parade and generously offered his time and energies to do this exhibit. So we piled everybody on a bus, and we visited these landmarks that we knew, if we were members of the glacial erratics, as being good geologic features, but we didn't know their story. And Randy proceeded to tell us his story. With that, Randy Lewis. We welcome him in our community.
And like I said at the beginning, you can catch Randy's portion on this YouTube channel. Just look for Red Star, Blue Star, Defeats Spexman. You've been listening to Voices of the Methow, an off-the-wall production. Until next time, thanks for listening.